And I want to thank my good friend and colleague, Senator Farnese from the 1st Senatorial District for his focus on the issue of driving economic activity to create jobs and put people to work and rebuild communities and do all the things appropriate and necessary to keep this state, and as this state is so much the foundation, in fact, the keystone of the country, to keep this nation moving forward. I rise again on this day, Mr. President, to remind our colleagues and remind all those who are listening and paying attention to make sure that we do not lose sight of the economic reality and the economic plight that exists for so many Pennsylvania citizens, and that we must be sure that we put them in focus as we try to deal with their reality, because it seems right now, Mr. President, that the policies that we're being advocated for here, that we are extremely out of focus on the average reality that exists for so many Pennsylvanians. I can tell you after my comments yesterday on the floor, Mr. President, that someone came to me this morning and said to me, thank you for painting a clear and distinct picture of what it is that they're confronting. Because they're one of those individuals, Mr. President, that are working almost 20 hours a day to try to make ends meet. And they're not too disconnected to this process that we oversee here in the General Assembly and the Senate here in Pennsylvania. I think a lot of folks have lost sight, and maybe they gain a recognition of the reality that the average person is dealing with in Pennsylvania and across this nation every time they fill up their gas tank. Gas prices have gone up 19% in the last year, and that number is dated because that number comes from information that we received about a week ago. And we all can look at our gas pump, look at our gas tank, and understand exactly what is happening in the last day. In fact, we know folks in many gas stations around the country, around the state, where gas prices, you left for work in the morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, and a regular tank of gas, the gallon was $3.73 an hour, and you come back, $3.73 a gallon, and you come back at the end of the day, 5:30, 6 o'clock, and lo and behold, the gas price is $3.83. But there's been a 19% increase in gas prices. I'm not sure that we understand that. I'm not sure if we're reflecting the reality that exists for the average Pennsylvania citizen. The average Pennsylvania citizen, the ones making the state go, the ones that are making our economy go, the ones that are putting in the hard work, the timeless work. They get up early in the morning. They work the early shift. I think we forgot about those individuals. Or even the ones that work the late shift. They report to work at 11 o'clock in the evening, and they work all night long. Or some of those individuals who start early, Mr. President, they work one job from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or maybe even 8 to 6, and then they leave this job and they go to a second job and work all night long and then have to come back to their first job. They're working 20 hours a day. I think we've forgotten about them, or at least the policies that are presented for this body to address seems to have forgotten about that reality. A 19% increase in gas prices in the past year, and that number is low. For ground beef, a 10% increase in beef prices. For butter, a 23% increase in butter. 23% increase in butter. In fact, inflation has been rising for the last several months at a 5.7% annual rate. While wages, Mr. President, and this is the real issue, while wages have only gone up 1.3%. Prices 5.7%, wages 1.3%. Gasoline 19%, wages 1.3%. Butter 23%, Wages, 1.3%. And how do our policies that we choose to adopt here in the Commonwealth, how do our policies impact that? Do they complement that? Do they try to address that? Do they try to achieve some parity, some balance? So far, that's not the case. But I'll get back to that in a little bit, Mr. President. Because what we're seeing here is that wages are being suppressed here in this country, in this state. Prices are going up like this. Wages are being suppressed. But one of the other reasons why we have an increase in gas prices, some folks want to say it's because of the crisis that exists in the Middle East, but that in fact is not the case. The fact is that there's a growing middle class in two of the fastest growing economies in the world, in China and India. The middle class is growing dramatically in those two countries, and as everyone knows, those are sizable populations that we're dealing with. So China, India, middle classes are growing. Which means incomes are growing there, which means wages, which means prices for oil can increase because it can respond to the growing middle class that exists in these huge populations in these huge countries, China and India. So their wages are going up, and they can respond to the price increases that are going up accordingly. But wages in this country are suppressed. You remember what I just said? 1.3% wage increase. And now we've got public workers, we've got non-public workers, folks working in the private economy, asking to take wage freezes to help contribute to the reality. And then we've got just average people working 2, 3, and 4 jobs. I said very succinctly, someone who comes to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, works a full day to 4, 5, and 6 o'clock, leaves their job, and then goes to a second job and works all night long, and then they wind up working 20 out of 24 hours of the day. And this just doesn't happen once or twice in the course of the week, Mr. President. This is happening 6 days a week. And yes, I said 6 days. Not 3 days, not 4 days. I said 6 days. And it's happening to more and more people. And what is our response to this? The response is not how do we help these individuals. The response is not how do we try to figure out how to provide some relief to these individuals to help them through. I understand that there's a budget crisis that exists all across the country, and especially exists here in Pennsylvania. We understand that. What we don't understand is that how, Mr. President, we can look at adopting policies that make it only more difficult for average working families to get through in this Commonwealth. Think about it. Think about it. We say to young people who are going to college right now, and we say to young people and their families who are going to college right now, that the message for you is that, young people, is that, you know what, you graduated high school, you got to college, you got accepted, you're going in your first year, you finished your first year, here's our gift to you, a 25% increase in your tuition. Now remember, that young person and their family had only a wage increase of 1.3% over the last year. Gasoline is going up 19%, butter is going up 23%, their wages have only gone up 1%, the national inflation is at 5.7%, but here we are dealing with a situation where we say to these young people and their families, you got a 25% projected increase in your tuition. Right now, those young people were already working through the summer just to make it on what they thought their tuition was going to be, and now we're in a situation where these individuals are looking at a potential 25% increase in their tuition. What does it say to them in terms of how much debt they have to take on to get through and pay for all their college? And then just think about it, put it in context. Just sit back for a minute and look at what's happening in the fastest growing economies across the world. China and India. Their middle class is growing. Our middle class is being suppressed. And the policies that are looked to being adopted here in this Commonwealth are only going to suppress that economy even more. Young people trying to go to college, and not so young people who are trying to go to college, are in a predicament because they cannot afford to pay for college. We're not making it easy for them. We even cut the budget. There's even a projection to cut the budget for community college. The great bridge from high school, or the great bridge to transform your skill set, is community colleges. And now that opportunity is being snatched away. Or at least that's the proposal. All I can say, Mr. President, is this math is not adding up. It's not adding up for thousands, if not millions, of families here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's not making sense. The policies don't add up. We haven't even talked about basic education, the fact that there are going to be so many local school districts who are probably going to have to raise property taxes to deal with the $1.2 billion projected cut for basic education funding from Harrisburg. We haven't even talked about that yet. And what kind of pressure does that put on average families who are just trying to make it through? Too much. Too much. And all of this in the context of the big problem, because there is no shared sacrifice. There is cuts in basic education, which means increases in local property taxes. There's cuts in higher education, which means increases in tuitions. But guess who gets off the hook? One more time. One more time. Guess who gets off the hook? It's our friends in the major corporations. They get a $200 million tax cut on March 3rd and a projected $350 to $400 million tax cut on March 8th. Within less than a week's time, about a $500 million tax cut for the largest corporations in the Commonwealth. Not for the average corporations, not for the mom and pop shops that are in our neighborhood, in our local community, but the big hitters. They're doing well financially, by the way. They're doing fine. But they get a tax cut. They get a tax break. While the average family, the average individual, living, working, struggling, trying to make it through, playing by the rules, they get kicked to the curb. They get kicked to the curb. And not to mention the 42,000 people who were cut off, summarily cut off of adult basic. The health insurance program put in place to provide health care services for working families across the Commonwealth. They get thrown to the side. So here it is again. I said this yesterday, and I'm going to continue to say it. February 28th, 42,000 people kicked off the rolls of adult basic, just let to go. March 3rd, $200 million tax break to the largest corporations. March 8th, projection, budget proposal, bling, it comes out. There it is, big headlines, right for everybody to see. Right for everybody to see. Right there, March 8th. Headlines, here it is. If you go to school, you're losing money. If you go to grade school, you lose money. If you go to grade school, there's no after-school programs because there's no money there for you. If you go to grade school, there's no tutorial programs to help you make your grade, get your marks up. If you go to grade school, more than likely that teacher that was doing such a great job, they may not be back the next year. If you go to grade school, there's no more help for you. $1.2 billion cut right out of your budget. And then added on that, if you go to college, hey, here's the present for you. Tuition increase. Not just 1%, not just 2%, not just 4%. How about 25%? Can you handle that? To make it round numbers, if you were paying $1,000 on year one, now you're paying $1,250 in year two, just to make it easy to understand. 25%. And to add a little bit more to it, here's your present, and to the big corporations in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, a $500 million tax break. Where's the shared sacrifice? How is it even across the board for everybody? How do we say that we're playing by the same set of rules when obviously, one group is getting taken care of better than the other? Well, the numbers are right here, Mr. President, straight from an article from the Washington Post. 5.7% rise in consumer prices, 1.3% increase in wages. Consumer prices going up like this, wages basically flat like that. There's a big gap there. Oh, and by the way, our corporate friends are getting the $500 million tax cut with no promise, no commitment to turn that tax break back into creating jobs or opportunity for the people who need it the most. It's not adding up, Mr. President. We got to make this thing work. We got to make this thing work better. We got to make this thing responsive to the needs of the people in the Commonwealth. At the very least, make sure that there's shared sacrifice, that the hit on education, that the hit on higher education is not so onerous, that families can't figure out a way to make it through. And make sure that everybody participates in the sacrifice that's supposed to be shared by everyone. Right now, it's a huge imbalance. And we've got to fix that balance. We've got to put it more in balance. We've got to put it more in kilter, because right now, working people are getting jammed. And it's not fair. The average Pennsylvania working person did not cause this budget crisis that we're in. This budget crisis that we're in was created by our friends on Wall Street. They created this budget crisis. And now their salaries are going through the roof. They're going through the roof. They're making more now after we stepped up and bailed that industry out. They're making more now than what they were making 3 years ago. But average wage for Pennsylvania workers, for the average worker, 1.3% increase. The guys who are already making the money, they're making more. And the way this budget proposal has been laid out to us, they're going to make even more. That's not fair. That's not right. There's no justice here, and we've got to make it right for Pennsylvania's working people. Thank you, Mr. President.